Before I start, as Christy said, I'm Harini Gokul. I am a technology leader and investor and deeply interested in education and innovation. And in my curiosity led me to think about what we needed to put in place to enable the future of innovation for our children, for our next generation going forward. And in order to answer what we needed to do, we have to start with where we are today. I sit in Seattle, Washington, which is a great place if you're in technology. I know many of you are dialing in from all over the world. Despite the pandemic, despite everything that's going on out there, tech is a great place to be right now, right? Tech is the future work. We've talked about the number of roles that are tech-centric in the next few years. I just picked 2 data points. There are so many. I picked 2. The chart on my left talks about the number of roles we've added on to tech in the past few years. We are at 8.8 million roles here, with employment growing at 15% if you're in tech occupations. This is in contrast to 10.5% for other non-tech roles. It's a very healthy outlook that's always looking for new talent. And you can see that manifest in the number of roles that get posted. So if you look on the right, there are 1.2 million roles that are just open and waiting for talent to join out there. The Seattle area certainly sees its own fair share of job posting opportunities. And this posting volume in the last 5 years has increased by 200%. So good story, right? You're looking at this wondering, well, I get it. Seattle is a great place. Washington is a great place. What are we here about? We're here because if tech is the future, we want to make sure that 50% of our population is part of that future, is not only participating and engaging, but also actively co-shaping and co-creating the future. And that's what gives us pause. The reality is that the growth of the tech sector unfortunately benefits a small and fairly homogeneous group of folks. Women, and particularly women of color, tend to be chronically underrepresented. And then when you think about women of color, and then further sub-segmented, right? Black, Latina, Native American women, they just make up 4% of the workforce. Things are getting worse, not better. So the story of 2 cities, 2 hills. As the tech economy improves and the number of jobs increase, unfortunately, the participation of women is not reflecting. So I pulled together a few numbers so we could sort of think about the State of the Union numbers. If you indulge me and go left to right, and then we'll come down to the bottom. What do we see? We see that women are only 23% of our high school AB computer science examiners, even though there are more women than men or more girls than boys interested in as they start. 23% AP exam takers, that then translates to the next box you see of 19% of bachelors in computer and information sciences tend to be women. So there the numbers start to dip. But then the good news is we see a slight bump when we go into the workforce. 26% of women are participating in the computer workforce, with a fairly broad description of all sort of IT software jobs. And this is an important number, 11. 11% of women have senior leadership roles in tech companies. So you have a lot more women as a percentage as they join the workforce. And then as the funnel reduces, as the funnel becomes more narrow, you see a disproportionate shedding of women as they reach your senior positions. So you have 11% of women in CIO roles, in corporate roles, and you see that scarcity out in board roles, of course. And when you think about more numbers to sort of round out the state of affairs for us. If you double it and you say, let's think about represented minorities, all women. So if you think Black, Latina, Native American women receiving computing degrees. It used to be a whopping 6%, which itself is a limited number, and it's now down to 4%. So the number of women who need this the most are getting fewer degrees. And if this trend continues, you will see that we have a number of underrepresented women of color getting computer degrees will not double until 2050. So that is a very long time to see equity in this space. And at the same time, we see that Washington State is the last two numbers as the state we live in. Washington State continues to have the second number of STEM jobs in our country. So like I said, the economy is doing great. We're continuing to hire and have more jobs, but we are 45th in terms of women participating in this. Now, I know this is a lot of numbers, but hopefully the message is coming through clear. It's a great economy. We have a great outlook. We need to make sure that we have women participating, engaging in all parts of the pipeline. The pandemic didn't make it better, right? As many of us know, we now have jobs that we never signed for. Women are doing 75% of the unpaid work at home, translating into 108 years to close the gender gap. And the reality is 1 in 4 women want to step back because of the pressures, the additional burdens of the pandemic. So it's not all doomsday, because there are multiple efforts that are going on right now. And Brenda is actually going to talk about some of them. We are seeing public-private partnerships happen in real, scalable, global ways to reset this, to address this huge challenge. And this cannot be an individual-driven effort. This cannot be opportunistic, and this cannot be solved by either one country or by one organization. So we've had multiple corporations think about how to retain women at work, how to retain working parents. In terms of policies, we're seeing increased flexibility with respect to childcare, with respect to part-time working. I love the creativity I see on job sharing as an example. We're seeing more convergence of policy work in this space to think about what could we do to make sure that we have the right policies in place so our women stay in the workforce and are encouraged to go through the educational system. And finally, there's a lot of individual accountability on each one of us to agitate and advocate for what we want to see in the future. So a blueprint that brings together both public and private partnerships with an appetite for creative thinking, long-term risks is important and is vital for us, because the future of the next inventors, the future of our next scientists and our engineers depend on it. I'll end with some of the things we've seen happen. We've seen companies that are investing not just in employees, but the industry and the talent pool at large, to be vocal and visible in addressing gender and racial equities, in reimagining recruitment, in reimagining talent management, in reimagining performance for their employees. Similarly, we have seen that there's a lot of work out in our public sector about putting together the right infrastructure of investing in education, of making sure that we have learning and resources available for those who need it the most. And there are multiple on-ramps available to come back into learning. I'll pause there and say that each one of us has a role to play in making sure that our girls and our women are thriving in this new world of work and can see a future, not just for education, but in the workforce and beyond. So I will pass on to Brenda to pick this up and give us more tools in our toolkit on how we can equip our girls and women going forward.
Yes, thank you for that. I'm glad that I was muted because I was over here like, yes, okay. I mean, there was a lot of responsive sound effect happening back to you, Harini. Thank you for all of that really great information. Okay, thank you, Christy, and the entire team for inviting me to participate today. I'm really happy to be here to share my perspective on life and learning in middle school. So as you've heard, my name is Brenda Leeks, and I am head of school at Seattle Girls School, which is a 5th through 8th grade standalone middle school for girls and gender non-binary students in the Central District of Seattle. I've spent my professional life in middle school because I know it to be a truly transformational and often magical time of life for kids. And that's what I'm here to talk to you all about today. School is a really important time of a child's life from all of the stages, from elementary through high school. And what I have here are some images of what you might see if you were walking down the hallway at various levels of school. So in elementary school, students learn the foundation of what supports their learning for the rest of their lives. Namely, they learn how to learn within a community of learners, which is a skill that elementary schools teach, how to learn when you're not just by yourself, when you have to think about others' needs, all of those things. They learn the fundamental skills of reading, writing, and mathematical thinking as well. Then in high school, if we flip to that side of it, students are challenged to both think at a higher level and a deeper level with more challenging content that calls on them to see nuances and dig deep into analytical thinking. And they're also challenged to get prepared for what comes after high school, which for 65% of our students is college, and for 35% of our high school graduates is the job market. So to some extent, elementary school is about kind of planting roots, educational roots, and then high school is about kind of clipping those roots so that students can then go forth in life and stand on their own. So what then is middle school all about? Unfortunately, many people, this might be a common poster that you'd see in a middle school hallway or classroom. Many people think that middle school is only about surviving puberty and the perils of peer pressure. And because of that, middle school, somewhat like middle children and families, can be neglected, misunderstood, excluded. And that's really unfortunate because it's such an important time in students' lives. It's about so much more than just surviving puberty. There's significant growth for students at all levels, physical, emotional, social, and academic during their middle school years. Right around the age of 11 or 12, the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is where students where executive functioning exists in humans, they undergo a growth spurt around that time. And so their brains expand, right? That area of their brain expands, and then they spend the next number of years, probably until their early to mid 20s, organizing and then pruning those synapses so that they kind of refine what's happening in that executive functioning center of the brain. There's also significant growth in the limbic system, which is where we process emotions. That's where a lot of that emotionality comes from in middle schools. There's a big development there during that time in their lives. And we know that middle school students move from being concrete thinkers, which was a cornerstone of their learning in elementary school, to being more abstract thinkers, which is what allows them to analyze complex scenarios and to problem solve and to create. This brain development sets them up for major exploration of their identity. Their peers are at the center of that, and that has a reason. It's because our students, they've been locked within their family structure in positive ways, and then in middle school, they're trying to begin the process of functioning outside of their family groups. And so they look to their peers to try to solidify their identity. They're figuring out what works by trying on different ways of expressing themselves and thinking about what they value and what they believe in. Now, I want to say that that's a really tiny window into a really complex process, the process of identity formation. And it's made more complex the more layers of identity you add on top of that. So everything from gender, race, socioeconomics, religious affiliation, political ideas, all of those things come into play for students during this time as they're thinking about who they are and what their identity is. Finally, students are working to find their voice. They want to take all the things they've figured out with their growing brain. They want to combine that with who they think they are and how they're coming to understand themselves. And they want to speak and they want to be heard. They're moving away from their perception of elementary school as being about compliance. And they're feeling that high school is about their independence. And middle school is the time when they test their wings around those things. So in summary, middle school is a perfect time for students to be challenged as their brains are growing, for them to be connected while they are forming their identities, and for them to be empowered so that they can use their voice. I believe that business and nonprofits and educational institutions can play a significant role during that time in students' lives. Earlier, I mentioned the brain development that happens in middle school students, right? Where their prefrontal cortex is expanding in terms of their synapses, and then they spend those years organizing and pruning. I'd like to offer that all of the middle school years, like that entire developmental time in students' lives could and should be like that time of prefrontal cortex development. So imagine a middle school student who's not just held and managed through middle school. Their moods are managed and their crazy ideas are managed and all those things are managed. But imagine a student who is challenged and exposed and invited and believed in to have lots of different experiences during this time when there's so many things changing about who they are. Middle school would be that time when they were exposed to those things. And then as they moved into high school and beyond, they would then be in a position to organize and cut back, right? Effectively making the decisions that they make around who they are and what their ideas are about what their life is going to be in the future. Those moments in high school and beyond where students are making long-lasting decisions that have impacts that are long-lasting around their futures. I believe that middle school could and should feel like that, where there's an expansion of what they're exposed to that is then allowing them to coalesce into an idea or identity that supports their future growth. So what could that look like? As you've heard, I'm the head of school at Seattle Girls School, and so I'm going to offer a few examples of how this time of middle school could be that expansion and how businesses, organizations, and educational institutions could support that process. These aren't the only ways that this could work. These aren't the only ways that I've seen this work, but they're just a few examples that I wanted to share. So to challenge students' brains while they're developing, right, I would suggest that we think deeper about academic partnerships. At SGS, we have a wide range of academic partnerships that support learning and really challenge students. The one I want to highlight today is what we call sixth grade medical boards. So our students spend much of their sixth grade year learning about how their body works. So we talk about all the things, they learn about the things that I just shared with you about the brain and so much more. And they learn about how their bodies work. They learn why ears are this way, why is skin color that way? What does that have to do with race and racism and how we see those things in the United States? And then at a certain point, they are challenged to specialize in a particular area of the body, and they have to become an expert. Well, to help them to become an expert in whatever their body system is, we connect them to volunteer medical professionals who meet with them, usually because they're all around. Even before COVID, we were not necessarily meeting in person. They meet with them to hear about what the kids are thinking, to challenge their thinking, to ask them questions, and to support their learning. And then the students have what we call a culmination, where they have to stand in front of a panel of doctors and their parents and their friends, and they're presented with questions and scenarios that they have to respond to on the spot. That is a crazy challenge for those kids. They are so nervous and anxious going into that. And you can imagine on the flip side, when they're finished, the pride that they have in themselves, the belief that they have in themselves, that they can do hard things, like that's something that that is just an amazing experience for them, and a gift for them as they're moving forward. We also believe that students need to be supported in their identity formation by having strong mentors around them. We bring in students, we bring in adults because we know that our kids, their peer group is their primary audience and their primary mirror for themselves around how they want to see themselves develop. And so we try to offer another view by bringing in mentors for them to, these could also be people that they could emulate, right? And so they have to be exposed to that in order for them to believe that. So we have community meeting, which is our weekly assembly. And in community meeting, we bring athletes, activists, politicians sometimes, writers, scientists, all kinds of people to come in and share their experiences with our students. And our students get so excited to engage with people at all walks of life. We also have a one-on-one mentorship program for our 6th grade students in their first year coming into SGS, where we pair them with volunteers from the community who are women and gender non-binary adults who spend a year with our students, engaging with them twice a month, either in activities that they organize or activities that we organize. And the message to our students through this mentorship program is there are people in the world who don't know you. They have no reason to be bought into your life, but they believe in you and they believe in your potential. And they want to walk with you while you're doing this really challenging work of figuring out who you are. Finally, there's a real opportunity for businesses and organizations to empower student voices by authentically engaging them. In case you didn't know, middle school students have a lot of ideas. They think they're right about everything. They're passionate about the world, what's right about it, more often what's wrong about it. And when asked, they are willing to give their opinions. When they are given opportunities to share their views, they step up. Our students at SGS participate in competitions. When there's a call for leadership, they volunteer. If there are work groups that are focused on issues that they believe in, they lean into those opportunities. And what's interesting is that the organizations that engage them authentically learn so much from them, but even more importantly, they teach those kids at a crucial time in their lives that their voices have real value, that they can contribute right now. Even though they can't vote, even though they don't pay taxes, even though they, can't contribute in a deep way to the economic side or that side of our society, their voices have value today. So as I come to the end of my time, I hope that you all feel inspired to take some action or at least start a conversation about how you could support middle school students around you, individually, with a school, or with an entire district. I believe that you would be surprised at the depth of the impact that you would have by engaging students at this time in their lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brenda. I wish I had these insights and your leadership as when I was in middle school.
Oh,
thank you.
I was going to say, I wish that I could have gone to SGS when I was in middle school.
No, I think you've highlighted a very important point on, middle school children needing this social emotional skills and support. Thank you. Let's do questions if there are any. And I think we've got another 5 minutes for questions, and then we will introduce the next panel. Should I look at the chat window for questions? Is that Hannah?
Oh, sure. I think I see one.
Okay.
Why do you think all programs skip over middle school? If there was only one thing businesses could do to support middle school, what could we do? I think that it's because there's a belief that the most important times in kids' lives are around elementary school and high school, right? Because, and it's real, people can't, it's harder for them to be successful in life if they don't have the basic skills of reading, writing, and mathematical thinking. And so that aspect, literacy, mathematical literacy and literacy in terms of reading and writing is so important in elementary, which is why that's such an important focus. And we have seen that that's an area where kids get left behind. So it makes sense that it's there, that there's a focus there. It also makes sense that there's a focus in high school because high school graduation is tied, based on research, to how kids are able to, or adults at that point, are able to support themselves in society moving on from there, right? And so all of that makes sense. It just doesn't make sense that because there's no there's no big moment, right? There's no rite of passage educationally for kids in middle school. It's kind of often can be just few years of holding, which is really unfortunate. And as I shared, I think that reaching out to offer partnerships and mentorship, I think it was Mike that also mentioned that earlier. Mentorship is important at all levels of people's lives. And that's something I think businesses could do.
Agreed. And I see a question coming my way, which is, let's see, Hannah, where did you drop this in? Are there good examples of corporate and government collaborating? The theme seems to be how can business and help, I guess, in middle school or in other things, and infrastructure investment. And what I would say is there are many, many examples of governments and organizations, public bodies and private organizations coming together to create scalable programs and frameworks that can benefit our communities. The one example that comes readily to mind sitting in Seattle is the apprentice program that two companies in the Seattle area, Microsoft and Amazon, are both part of. They partner with the Washington Technology Association, the WTIA, to make sure that we are looking at all talent to feed and match our hiring needs, and we are investing in skilling across all our communities as well. I think moving away, staying on the topic of learning in schools, we are coming to terms that education, good education and quality skilling comes in many different shapes and forms. 4-year degrees are no longer the only way to go. And looking at creative apprentice programs to skill and reskill our communities and our local talent is important. And I know these are two companies among many that do this. And I know these exist both locally in other states and cities. They exist internationally as well.
There was a question about public versus private in terms of some of these, some of our suggestions. I think that's a real issue. Private schools, I'm at a private school, because they are a district of one, right? And all the decisions about what happens in that building are made within that building. They are able to be a lot more nimble. But there are strong partnerships that are happening with public schools, and there's a real need for those partnerships across all levels. And particularly, public middle schools are often a time when students feel lost. Part of the reason 50% of the students who come to my school come from public schools and then go back to their public high schools because they're worried about the middle school experience for their kids. I would recommend starting with an individual building, right? Getting to know a principal. Those principals are going to say yes, particularly if you come in with ideas and then solutions and then resources. Just ideas are often not helpful. And sometimes just resources without ideas about how to use them are also not helpful. So coming to a school and saying, I want to sit with you, principal, I want to hear what your needs are, and then I want to brainstorm with you to help do all of the pieces, right? Figuring out the idea, thinking about the training, thinking about the implementation and the resources. Public school principals would raise their hands for that.
Okay, one last question. What fields are emerging right now, and what do you predict will be the most important one in 5 and 10 years? We've got a minute to the next panel, so I'm going to say, one, there are no magic balls, but tech-influenced, tech-centric, and human-centric roles are going to be the future for us. I see technology enabling many of the roles we do. AI, machine learning are no longer things that in theory or that are discussed in panels. It's real life. Call center employees using AI technology to better deliver on their roles is a reality of today. There are many, many different use cases. So I would say getting to terms and shaping that technology from an ethical perspective, from a policy perspective, and a product perspective is going to be important. So if you're on this call and thinking about what major to go and pursue next, I would say check out your latest AI and ML classes as a start.